For 42 years now, John Davis and the gang at MotorWeek have consistently remained a staple of informative news about car unveilings, testings, and maintenance tips after debuting on PBS in 1981, resulting in their eventual network syndication in 1993. Still delivering new episodes year-round as they approach the 2000 mark, we at Hot Cars thought it would be the perfect time to take a trip down memory lane and rediscover some of our favorite retro review videos featured on MotorWeek's YouTube channel. Although it would be nearly impossible to track down every review they've completed in their 42-season run, we've gone ahead and sifted through the 800 episodes on their channel to bring you some of the best retro review to feature classic cars on the internet. Retro review of the 2005 Ford GT. As one of the few high-performance Ford concept cars to actually make it through the production process, Ford introduced the GT in 2005 after debuting as the GT40 concept car 3 years earlier. While similar in every way to the GT40 at first glance, the Ford GT was not only wider and longer, but also taller than the Ford GT40, in addition to containing no structural similarities. With its aluminum body that houses a 5.4-liter rear mid-engined V8, mated to an Eaton screw-type supercharger, the GT catapults from 0 to 60 in as little as 3.3 seconds thanks to 550 prancing horses located 6 inches behind the driver's head. Selling for nearly $100,000 over the suggested retail of $139,000, the GT gave the Ford Motor Company the ability to be in the same breath as Ferrari and Lamborghini for the first time in years. Retro review of the BMW E30 M3. Although it is pretty hard to comprehend, the rich history of production M cars began just a mere 37 years ago. Arriving in 1986 and relieving the tired bones of the long-reigning BMW 2002, the M3 was the result of homologation rules for Germany's greatest racing spectacle, the Deutsche Tourenwagen Masters, DTM. Fortunately for the gearheads of the world, Group A rules stipulated 5,000 production homologation specials to compete in DTM. The result ended with the first-ever M3 rolling off the line in 1986, sporting touring car-inspired aerodynamics and race-ready components for around $34,000. Featuring a detuned version of BMW's F1 engine, the DOHC, inline 4 boasted a healthy 192 horsepower and 170 pound-feet of torque. The M3 needed a 4-wheel ABS braking system to bring the German thoroughbred to a halt, which was unheard of on a production compact executive car at the time. Retro review of the 1987 Buick GNX. Nearly 21 years after Merriam-Webster coined the term muscle car, Buick introduced the GNX, an ultra-performance-inspired regal and widely considered to be one of the few true American muscle cars from this era. Unveiled in 1987, the GNX, or Grand National Experimental, transformed your average Buick Regal Grand National into a McLaren-tuned monster. Although rated at 276 horsepower from the factory, the redesigned turbocharged V6 actually produced closer to 300 horsepower and 420 pound-feet of torque. This allowed the GNX to register faster quarter-mile times than the Ferrari F40 and Porsche 930, a fact that lives in American folklore as the time a Buick slayed 2 of Europe's greatest titans. Retro review of the 1988 Ferrari Testarossa. Already 4 years into its reign of terror on automotive society, the Ferrari Testarossa was long considered an instant classic when MotorWeek got its hand on it in 1988. With its longitudinally mounted flat 12 engine and Pininfarina design, the Testarossa proudly wore the flagship badge of honor for Ferrari throughout the 80s. Forever cemented in classical American television and video games, the Testarossa remains a pivotal part of American culture, whether or not domestic gearheads have anything to say about it. Spawning numerous knockoffs, replicas, and body kits, the Testarossa remained in production until 1996, selling nearly 10,000 units, making it the most produced Ferrari behind only the 355 and 308. Retro review of the 1988 Porsche 911 Carrera. 1988 proved to be a stalwart year for MotorWeek as they managed to review another automotive icon in the Porsche 930 911 Carrera. Although not as celebrated as its forced induction sibling, the naturally aspirated 3.2-liter flat six still produces one of the greatest symphonies when rowing through the gears, even if it didn't have the delicious turbo sounds. Sporting a meager 214 horsepower, even by 1988 standards, the Carrera still manages to hurl itself through the corners with all the vigor and vitality the average Porsche purist expects. Thanks to an upgraded G50 Getrag transmission and optional, and somewhat controversial, slant-nose front end, the '88 Carrera remains one of the most appreciated 911s of all time. Retro review of the 2009 Nissan R35 GTR. Undoubtedly the newest car on this list, the Nissan GTR was an instant classic since it debuted at the Tokyo Motor Show in 2007. After finally making it to production for the 2009 model year, the GTR arrived as a true sports car befitting of the GTR heritage. Although no longer associated with the Skyline mark it was in years past, the GTR managed to keep a few of the Skyline's most important characteristics, including the Atisa all-wheel drive system, a straight six-engine layout, and the iconic rounded taillights. Producing 473 horsepower and 480 pound-feet of torque, with the capability to produce nearly twice that amount through tuning. Godzilla finally returned to terrorize the streets of Asia, Europe, and for the first time, America. Retro review of the 1995 Volkswagen GTI VR6. Long considered the champion of the people, the Volkswagen GTI once again proved why it is so beloved in the car community when it stuffed the glorious-sounding VR6 engine from the high-end Corrado into its humble hatchback. Years after many automotive manufacturers abandoned the hot hatch game, Volkswagen managed to reignite the hatchback craze in the 90s, nearly a decade after these pocket rockets swept the globe. Producing 172 horsepower and 173 pound-feet of torque in a car that weighs less than 3,000 pounds, the GTI VR6 remains one of the most intriguing driving experiences of the numerous GTI generations. From its ultra-responsive handling to its everyday practicality, the MK3 GTI VR6 continues to endure 30 years apart from its arrival. Retro review of the 2004 Subaru STI versus 2003 Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution. Like with most of modern-day car culture, much of it is directly linked to America's obsession with the Fast and the Furious franchise, which still rings true to this day. However, on the bright side, the budding teenagers' infatuation with tuner-oriented cars sent automakers into a tizzy, allowing us to taste some of Japan's forbidden fruit in the Subaru WRX STI and Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution. Already legends in their own right thanks to their historic rally pedigree, America was finally allowed to enjoy the party in 2003 when these ordinary Malaise cars became icons. At first glance, these two seem like long-lost siblings. But when peeling back the layers, it couldn't be more obvious these two cars have more dissimilarities than not. However, it was their individuality that led reviewers to proclaim they are one and the same, thanks to similar power figures and nearly identical quarter miles and 0 to 60 times. Retro review of the Callaway Twin, Turbo C4 Corvette and ZR1. Seen as a pillar of American car culture since its introduction in 1953, the Corvette couldn't quite live up to the reputation of its European competition, no matter how much Chevrolet tried to tell you otherwise. However, for a brief moment in 1990, Chevy found itself inching in the right direction with the introduction of the Callaway Twin Turbo and ZR1 Corvette. Receiving new aerodynamics, a meaty tire setup, and a newly developed aluminum 5.7-liter V8, the ZR1 sat atop the Corvette totem pole in terms of production models. Churning out 385 horsepower and 370 pound-feet of torque, the Vetta set its sights squarely on the exotic market, producing better figures than the Ferrari Testarossa and Lamborghini Jalpa. However, for an extra $25,000, you could skip the Chevy dealership and head to Callaway Cars for their radically reimagined twin-turbo C4. The extra cash netted you a redeveloped iron block 5.7-liter V8, increasing the horsepower to 390 and a monstrous 570 pound-feet of torque, creating a true rival to Europe's best and brightest for a small moment in time. Retro review of the 1994 Toyota Supra versus Porsche 968 versus Stealth versus 300ZX versus RX-7 versus Corvette. In what might be the greatest year for sports car production, we felt it was only right to end this list with this face-off between 5 of some of the most important sports cars to date. And the Dodge Stealth. Pitting the Toyota Supra, Porsche 968, the aforementioned Stealth, Nissan 300ZX, Mazda RX-7, and Chevrolet Corvette from the 1994 production year against each other. MotorWeek tried to end the debate once and for all nearly 30 years ago. Although MotorWeek remained relatively neutral on their opinion, they make a case as to why each car could be the best sports car of this year. But now, thanks to the hindsight of the previous 30 years, we have to imagine MotorWeek would agree with the general opinion the A80 Supra proved to be the best sports car, as it remains competitive by today's sports car standards. After a little tuning, of course.